The stagecoach lurched to a halt in Aurora, Nevada, throwing Valentina Carlyle against the worn seat as dust from the summer of 1878 billowed through the open window, coating her already travel-stained dress in another layer of grit that matched the weariness in her bones. She clutched the small leather satchel containing everything she owned in this strange America, her fingers trembling not from the July heat, but from the overwhelming terror of arriving in a town where nobody waited for her, where her uncle's promised letter had never reached, where her broken English would mark her as foreign and alone. The driver called out something she could not fully understand, his words tumbling together too fast for her limited grasp of this harsh new language. Valentina descended carefully, her legs unsteady after 3 days of constant travel from San Francisco, where the ship from Italy had deposited her among thousands of other hopeful souls seeking something better than the poverty that had claimed her parents and 4 siblings to disease and starvation. She was 20 years old, alone in a silver mining town in the middle of the Nevada desert, with exactly $12 sewn into the hem of her skirt and a heart full of prayers that felt hollow in the dry air. Aurora sprawled before her in a haphazard collection of wooden buildings, tents and false-fronted structures that promised more substance than they possessed. The main street churned with activity as miners, merchants, gamblers, and women of questionable reputation moved through the afternoon heat. Valentina stood frozen beside her small trunk, watching this foreign world swirl around her, understanding nothing of the rapid conversations, the laughter, the curses that filled the air. A man stumbled past her, reeking of whiskey despite the early hour, and said something that made the others nearby laugh. Valentina did not understand the words, but she understood the look in his eyes, the way his gaze traveled her body with an assessment that made her skin crawl. She gathered her courage and dragged her trunk toward the nearest building, which bore a painted sign she could not read. Inside, a woman with hard eyes and rouge on her cheeks looked her up and down with professional assessment. Valentina tried to form the English words she had practiced on the ship, the phrases taught to her by a patient German woman who had made the crossing 6 times helping her sisters emigrate. "I look for work," Valentina managed, her accent thick, the words feeling strange in her mouth. "Clean. Cook." "So," the woman laughed, but not unkindly. "Honey, you are in the wrong establishment for that kind of work, though I could use a girl with your looks for other purposes." She must have seen the confusion and then dawning horror in Valentina's face because she softened slightly. "The boarding house. 2 streets over. Mrs. Patterson might need help. Tell her Ruby sent you." Valentina understood perhaps half the words, but she grasped boarding house and Mrs. Patterson and nodded gratefully. "Thank you, Gracie." Ruby gave her directions with hand gestures that helped bridge the language gap, and Valentina set out again, dragging her trunk through the dusty street, feeling the weight of curious and not always friendly stares. The boarding house, when she found it, was a 2-story structure that looked more solid than most buildings in town, with actual glass windows and a small garden where someone had coaxed flowers to bloom despite the harsh climate. Mrs. Patterson was a widow of 50 with steel-gray hair and a no-nonsense manner that reminded Valentina painfully of her grandmother back in the village she would never see again. The older woman listened to Valentina's halting explanation, studied the reference letter written in careful English by the German woman on the ship, though it said little more than that Valentina Carlyle was of good moral character and hard-working nature. "Can you cook, Mrs. Patterson asked, speaking slowly. "Yes," Valentina said, nodding eagerly. "Cook, clean, wash, sew. Room and board plus $2 a week," Mrs. Patterson said. You will help with cooking, cleaning, laundry, and mending. Breakfast is at 6, supper at 6. We have 8 boarders, all men, all minors or working the claims. You keep to yourself, no fraternizing, understand. Valentina understood perhaps 60%, but she nodded because she had no other options and because Mrs. Patterson's stern face held a hint of kindness around the eyes that reminded her of home. That first evening, Valentina met the boarders when they came in for supper. Mrs. Patterson had put her to work immediately, and though the kitchen was different from the one she had grown up in, fire was fire and food was food. She had helped prepare a simple meal of beef stew, biscuits, and apple pie, working from Mrs. Patterson's instructions delivered through gestures and simple words. The men filed in dusty and tired from their day's labor, taking their seats at the long table in the dining room. They were rough men, weathered by sun and hard work, but Mrs. Patterson ran a respectable house, and they removed their hats and kept their language relatively clean in her presence. Valentina carried out the serving bowls, keeping her eyes down as Mrs. Patterson had instructed, but she felt their curiosity like a physical touch. She understood fragments of their conversation, understood they were talking about her, about where she came from, about her appearance, about why a young woman would come alone to a mining town. One man at the end of the table, younger than the others, perhaps 25 or 26, said nothing. Valentina noticed because his silence stood out among the others' rough banter. When she poured coffee into his cup, she glanced up briefly and met eyes the color of the summer sky back home, startlingly blue in his sun-bronzed face. He nodded slightly, a gesture of simple acknowledgement without the assessment or speculation she had seen in other men's eyes all day. "Thank you," he said quietly, and she understood those words perfectly. "Welcome," she replied, one of her limited English words, and returned quickly to the kitchen. Mrs. Patterson nodded approval. "You did well. That cowboy at the end, Jackson Delaney, he has been boarding here for 2 years. Quiet man, keeps to himself. Works as a ranch hand at the Morrison spread outside town, saves his money, not like the others who drink and gamble it away." Valentina understood little of this explanation, but she nodded and continued washing the dishes in the large basin, her hands red from the hot water and lye soap. The days fell into a rhythm as summer deepened into August. Valentina rose before dawn to help Mrs. Patterson prepare breakfast for the boarders. She scrubbed floors, washed linens, hauled water, mended clothes, and slowly began to understand more of the English that swirled around her. She learned the names of things by pointing and asking, and Mrs. Patterson proved surprisingly patient with her halting questions. The boarders grew accustomed to her presence, and most treated her with distant respect. A few made suggestions that Mrs. Patterson shut down with a sharp word before Valentina fully understood the implications. She learned to keep her eyes down, to move quickly through the rooms, to make herself as invisible as possible. Jackson Delaney remained an enigma. He spoke little at meals, never joined the others when they headed to the saloons in the evening. He was always polite when Valentina served him, always said thank you, but never attempted conversation beyond those simple courtesies. She noticed he read books in his room by lamplight, noticed he kept his small space neat and his few possessions carefully maintained. His boots were always clean when he came to table, and he washed before meals without being reminded, unlike some of the others. On Sundays, Mrs. Patterson closed the boarding house for supper, and the boarders fended for themselves. The older woman attended church services and insisted Valentina accompany her. The small church held families and respectable citizens, and Valentina felt the weight of their stares, heard the whispers about the Italian girl who spoke broken English and worked at the boarding house. After the third Sunday, as they walked back through the quiet streets, Valentina gathered her courage. "Why they look?" she asked Mrs. Patterson, struggling to form the question. "I do something wrong," Mrs. Patterson sighed, her stern face softening. "No, child, you did nothing wrong. People fear what they do not understand. You are foreign to them, different. They will judge you for your accent, for being alone, for daring to come here without a husband or family. It is not fair, but it is the way of things." Valentina understood enough to feel the injustice of it burning in her chest. She had committed no crime except being born in a different place, speaking a different language, surviving when her family had not. But she said nothing because what could she say that her limited English would adequately express? That evening, as she sat in the small room Mrs. Patterson had given her under the eaves, darning socks by candlelight because she could not afford to waste the resource of light, Valentina allowed herself tears for the first time since arriving in Aurora. She cried silently for her mother, dead 3 years now, for her father who had followed 6 months later, for her siblings claimed by scarlet fever, for the village she would never see again, for the loneliness that was a constant ache in her chest. A soft knock on her door startled her. She wiped her face quickly and opened it to find Mrs. Patterson holding a cup of tea and a piece of the cake she had baked that afternoon. "I heard you crying," the older woman said gently, her stern facade completely fallen away. "I know this is hard. When I came west with my husband 30 years ago, I felt just as lost. Eat this, drink the tea, and remember that each day it will get a little easier." Valentina took the offerings with trembling hands. "Thank you," she whispered, and the words carried more weight than their simple meaning. September brought cooler nights and the first hints that summer would not last forever in this high desert country. Valentina had been in Aurora for 2 months, and her English had improved through constant immersion. She could follow most conversations now, even if she struggled to form her own responses with the fluency she desired. Mrs. Patterson praised her work and increased her wages by 50 cents a week, a fortune that Valentina carefully saved in the small tin box under her bed. The boarding house had 2 new residents, miners fresh from California who spoke loudly and drank heavily. Mrs. Patterson tolerated them because they paid their rent on time, but she watched them carefully and instructed Valentina to never be alone in a room with either of them. Jackson Delaney continued his quiet existence at the end of the table, a steady presence among the changing faces of boarders who came and went as claims proved out or failed. Valentina found herself noticing small things about him. The way he always held doors open when she was carrying something heavy. How he once stopped another boarder from making a crude comment by simply looking at the man with those steady blue eyes until the words died unspoken. One evening in late September, as Valentina cleared the supper dishes, one of the new miners grabbed her wrist as she reached for his plate. "Why don't you sit and talk with me a while, pretty girl?" he said, his words slurred by drink, his grip tight enough to hurt. Valentina tried to pull away, her heart hammering. "Please," she managed, "I have work." "Work can wait," the miner said, pulling her closer. Jackson Delaney stood so quickly his chair scraped loud against the floor. "Let her go." His voice was quiet, but something in it made the entire room fall silent. The miner looked up, assessing, seeing a man taller than himself, leaner but with the hard muscle of someone who worked with horses and cattle. "We are just talking friendly-like." "Let her go," Jackson repeated, and this time it was not a request. The miner released Valentina's wrist, throwing up his hands in mock surrender. "No harm meant, Cowboy, just being friendly." Jackson waited until Valentina had gathered the dishes and retreated safely to the kitchen before sitting back down. Mrs. Patterson had witnessed the entire exchange from the doorway, and she nodded at Jackson with approval. In the kitchen, Valentina's hands shook as she set down the dishes. She rubbed her wrist where the miner's fingers had left red marks. Mrs. Patterson came in, took one look at her, and pulled her into a brief, hard embrace. "That cowboy is a good man," the older woman said. "There are not many of those in this town." Valentina nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. She thought about Jackson's intervention, about the quiet strength in his voice, about how he had not asked for thanks or made a show of protecting her, simply done what was right and returned to his meal. The next morning, as she served breakfast, Valentina paused at Jackson's place. He looked up from his coffee, and she met his eyes directly for the first time since arriving in Aurora. "Thank you," she said carefully, putting all the gratitude she could not express in her limited English into those 2 words. "For yesterday." Jackson's weather-beaten face softened slightly. "You are welcome. I am sorry that happened." "You are good man," Valentina said, the words feeling inadequate for what she wanted to express. Something shifted in his eyes, surprise perhaps, or recognition. "You are learning English fast. I remember when you first came, you could barely string 3 words together." Valentina felt heat rise in her cheeks. He had noticed her, paid attention, remembered. "I try hard. English is difficult." "Italian is probably just as difficult for English speakers," Jackson said, and she heard no mockery in his voice, just simple observation. "Yes," she agreed, pleased he had identified her homeland correctly when so many just called her that foreign girl. "Very difficult, Mrs. Patterson called from the kitchen, and Valentina had to return to work. But as she moved through the rest of breakfast service, she felt lighter somehow, as if that brief exchange had lifted some of the loneliness that had weighed on her for months. That Sunday after church, as Valentina and Mrs. Patterson walked back toward the boarding house, they passed the general store. Valentina paused to look at the display in the window, and her eye caught on a book of poetry, its leather cover embossed with gold lettering. She had loved poetry back home, had memorized verses in Italian, had dreamed once of perhaps writing her own, though such dreams seemed foolish now when survival took all her energy. "You read English well enough for that?" Mrs. Patterson asked, following her gaze. Slowly, Valentina admitted. "But I would like to try, to learn better." "Books are expensive," Mrs. Patterson said, not unkindly, and Valentina nodded. She knew the cost, had counted her saved wages against it, and knew she could not afford such a luxury when winter was coming and she would need warmer clothes. The next Sunday, Valentina found a package on her bed wrapped in brown paper. Inside was the poetry book from the store window. Her hands trembled as she opened it, seeing the inscription written in a careful hand on the inside cover. "For Valentina, may these words bring you joy. From a friend." She knew Mrs. Patterson's handwriting from the shopping lists and notes left around the kitchen. This was not her hand. The writing was more angular, less practiced. Valentina held the book to her chest and felt tears sting her eyes. Nobody had given her a gift since before her family had died, since before the world had become about survival rather than living. That evening at supper, she caught Jackson's eye and mouthed, "Thank you." He nodded slightly, then returned his attention to his meal, but she saw the faint smile that touched his lips. Valentina began reading the poetry in her small room each evening, sounding out the unfamiliar words, looking up those she could not decipher in the small English-Italian dictionary she had bought in San Francisco. The poem spoke of love and loss, nature and beauty, longing and hope. They fed something in her soul that had been starving since she left Italy. One evening, as she struggled with a particularly difficult passage, she heard a soft knock on her door. Opening it, she found Jackson standing in the hallway, looking uncomfortable. "I am sorry to disturb you," he said. "Mrs. Patterson said you were having trouble with some of the poems. I thought maybe I could help if you wanted. I read a lot, and I know the words can be difficult." Valentina hesitated, knowing Mrs. Patterson's rules about fraternizing with boarders, but the older woman herself had sent Jackson, so it must be acceptable. "Yes, please. I would like help." They sat in the hallway with the door open for propriety, Valentina holding the book between them. Jackson explained the difficult passages, his voice patient as he broke down the meanings, the metaphors, the imagery. Valentina listened intently, occasionally asking questions in her still imperfect English, and Jackson never made her feel foolish for not understanding. "You learn fast," he said after an hour had passed. "When I try to learn Spanish from the vaqueros at the ranch, I can barely remember 3 words together." "You speak Spanish?" Valentina asked, surprised. "Badly," Jackson admitted with a self-deprecating smile. "I work with Mexican cowboys who laugh at my accent, but they are patient like you are patient with English." "We are both learning," Valentina said. "That is good thing." "Yes," Jackson agreed, and something in his voice made her look up and meet his eyes. She saw warmth there, interest, but also respect and restraint. He was not like the men who looked at her with hunger or judgment. He looked at her like she was a person, complete and valuable despite her broken English and foreign ways. After that evening, helping Valentina with her reading became a regular occurrence. 3 or 4 times a week, after supper was cleared and the dishes washed, Jackson would knock on her door and they would sit in the hallway working through poems, or sometimes the newspaper. Jackson explaining idioms and slang that confused her, Valentina slowly building her vocabulary and confidence. Mrs. Patterson observed these sessions with approval, sometimes sitting in her chair at the end of the hall doing her own mending, a silent chaperone ensuring propriety. Valentina was grateful for the older woman's progressive attitude, knowing many would not allow even this supervised contact between a single woman and a single man. October arrived with frost on the windows, and the news that several mines were closing for the winter, putting dozens of men out of work. The boarding house emptied as miners left for California or other boom towns, leaving only 4 regular residents including Jackson. Mrs. Patterson worried about finances, though she did not burden Valentina with the details, but Valentina saw the concern in her face the way she calculated expenses more carefully. "If you need," Valentina offered hesitantly. "I can take less money, I have room, food. That is much." "Absolutely not," Mrs. Patterson said firmly. "You work hard, you earn your wages. We will manage." But 2 weeks later, Mrs. Patterson called Valentina into the small office where she kept the boarding house accounts. Her face was grave, and Valentina felt her stomach clench with worry. "I am not going to dismiss you," Mrs. Patterson said immediately, seeing Valentina's fear. "But I need to tell you that finances are tighter than I expected. The boarding house income alone will not carry us through winter. I have savings, but I am older than I once was, and the work is hard. I am thinking of taking in laundry from the town, offering mending services, maybe baking pies to sell at the general store. I wondered if you would be willing to help with these extra ventures. I would split the additional income with you." Relief flooded through Valentina. "Yes, of course. I help with everything. Wash, mend, bake, whatever you need." They began the next day, putting notices around town that Mrs. Patterson's boarding house now offered laundry and mending services. Valentina worked longer hours, her hands red and raw from wash water, her eyes strained from close sewing work by lamplight. But the extra income helped, and she took pride in building something, contributing to keeping the household afloat. Jackson noticed her exhaustion and the toll the extra work was taking. One evening, he approached Mrs. Patterson with a proposal. "I know a man at the Morrison Ranch," he said. "His wife takes in laundry from some of the mining camps, but she is expecting their fourth child and cannot keep up with demand. She would split the work with you if you could handle it, and the mining camps pay well because they have no women to do washing for them." Mrs. Patterson considered this. That would require transporting laundry back and forth, someone to coordinate the work. "I could handle the transport," Jackson offered. "I make the ride out to the ranch 6 days a week anyway. It would not be difficult to bring laundry back and forth." "You would do this?" Mrs. Patterson asked. "What would you ask in return?" "Nothing," Jackson said. "I am just trying to help." Mrs. Patterson studied him for a long moment. "You are a good man, Jackson Delaney. Your mother raised you right." Jackson's face tightened briefly, some old pain crossing his features. "My mother did her best with what she had. I try to honor that." The arrangement began the following week, and suddenly Valentina found herself with steady work that would carry them through winter. The mining camp laundry paid 3 times what town washing brought in, and though the work was hard and the clothes often filthy beyond anything Valentina had encountered, she was grateful. Jackson proved true to his word, arriving at the boarding house each evening with bundles of dirty laundry, and departing each morning with cleaned and mended items to return to the camps. These exchanges brought them into daily contact, and their friendship deepened naturally, built on mutual respect and quiet understanding. Valentina found herself listening for the sound of Jackson's horse each evening, anticipating their brief conversations as he helped her carry the heavy laundry bundles. He told her about the ranch where he worked, about the horses he trained, about his dream of saving enough money to buy his own small spread someday. She told him about Italy, about her family, about the village in the mountains where she had grown up, struggling with her English but finding he was patient with her halting descriptions. "Why did you come to America?" Jackson asked one evening in late October as they stood on the boarding house porch, the desert stars brilliant overhead. Valentina was quiet for a moment, gathering the English words. "My family all died, disease, hungry, both. There was nothing in Italy for me. My uncle wrote from San Francisco, said he could help me find work. But when I arrived, he was gone. Someone said he went to mining camps in Montana, maybe Idaho. I had no money to follow, so I came here because the stagecoach fare was cheap." "I am sorry about your family," Jackson said quietly. "That must have been hard, losing everyone." "Yes," Valentina agreed simply, because there were no words in English or Italian adequate for that kind of loss. "You have family?" Jackson's face went distant. "My mother died when I was 16, never knew my father. I worked odd jobs for a few years, then came west from Missouri looking for something better. Been working ranches ever since, saving what I can." "We are both orphans," Valentina said softly, "both looking for home." Jackson turned to look at her directly, and in the lamplight spilling from the window, his blue eyes were intense. "Yes," he said, "I suppose we are." Something shifted between them in that moment, an acknowledgement of connection, of shared experience that transcended language barriers and cultural differences. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment before Mrs. Patterson called from inside that supper was ready, breaking the spell. November brought the first real snowfall, a light dusting that transformed Aurora into something almost beautiful, hiding the rough edges and mining scars under white. The boarding house was warm and cozy, the big stove in the parlor keeping the chill at bay. Valentina had grown to love this place, had made it feel more like home than anywhere had since she left Italy. The reading sessions with Jackson continued, but they had expanded beyond just poetry. He brought newspapers, explained the political situation in America, helped her understand the complexities of this still young country. She shared Italian phrases with him, taught him to count in her language, told him stories about Italian traditions and holidays. Mrs. Patterson watched this growing friendship with mixed emotions. Valentina knew the older woman cared for her like a daughter, wanted to protect her, but also saw something developing between Valentina and Jackson that was rare and worth nurturing. She maintained her rules about propriety, but bent them slightly, allowing longer conversations, permitting Jackson to walk with Valentina to the general store when she needed supplies. The town's opinion of Valentina had slowly shifted as well. She was no longer the strange foreign girl but Valentina from Mrs. Patterson's boarding house, a hard worker who kept to herself. Some of the women nodded to her on the street now, and the shopkeepers greeted her by name. It was not full acceptance, but it was progress. One Sunday in mid-November, Jackson surprised Valentina by asking if she would like to take a walk after church. Mrs. Patterson gave permission with a knowing look, and Valentina bundled into her warmest shawl, her heart beating faster than the cold alone could explain. They walked to the edge of town where the buildings gave way to scrubland and distant mountains. The desert in winter had a stark beauty that Valentina had come to appreciate, so different from the green mountains of her homeland but magnificent in its own way. "I have been thinking about something," Jackson said as they stood looking at the landscape. "I hope I do not overstep by saying this." Valentina waited, unsure what he would say, nervous and hopeful at once. "I like spending time with you," Jackson continued, his eyes on the horizon as if he could not quite meet her gaze. "I like talking with you, even when the words are difficult. I like your laugh, the way you concentrate so hard when you are learning something new. I like how kind you are to Mrs. Patterson, how hard you work. I like that you have survived so much and still smile, still find joy in small things like poems and stars." Valentina's breath caught. "Jackson, please, let me finish," he said gently. "I know I am just a cowboy who works for wages and has nothing to offer. I know you are new here, still learning, still finding your place. I know people would talk, would say things about you being foreign and me being foolish. But I would like to court you properly if you would allow it, if you would want that, with Mrs. Patterson's approval, of course." Valentina felt warmth flood through her chest despite the cold air. "You think I am worth courting?" she asked softly. "Even with my broken English, even though I am foreign," Jackson finally turned to look at her directly. "I think your English is beautiful. I love your accent, the way you sometimes search for words and find creative ways to explain what you mean. I do not care where you were born. You are brave and strong and kind. Those things matter more than perfect grammar." Tears pricked Valentina's eyes, but they were good tears, happy tears. In Italy, there was no one. The village was small and the boys I knew were like brothers. I thought maybe I would always be alone. Then I came here and I thought for certain I would be alone because who would want immigrant girl who can barely speak English? "I would," Jackson said simply. "If you would want me." "Yes," Valentina said, the word coming out more like a breath than speech. "Yes, I would like if you court me." Jackson smiled, really smiled, and it transformed his usually serious face into something joyful and young. "May I hold your hand?" he asked. Valentina offered her hand and his wrapped around it, warm and calloused from hard work, strong and gentle at once. They stood there in the cold November air, hands joined, looking at the mountains and feeling like maybe, finally, they had each found what they had been searching for. Mrs. Patterson approved the courtship with enthusiasm that surprised neither of them. "I had hoped for this," she admitted. "You are well matched, you two. You both understand loneliness and hardship. You both have good hearts." The courtship proceeded with appropriate propriety for 1878 Nevada. Jackson and Valentina spent supervised time together, taking walks with Mrs. Patterson trailing behind at a discreet distance, sitting in the parlor in the evenings reading together, while the older woman sat nearby with her knitting. Jackson brought small gifts, wildflowers he found on his rides to and from the ranch, a ribbon from the general store, a pretty stone he thought she might like. Valentina treasured each gift like it was made of gold, not for its monetary value but for what it represented. Jackson noticed her, thought of her, wanted to make her happy. These were precious things, worth more than money. The other boarders noticed the courtship and mostly approved. They had seen how hard Valentina worked, had witnessed Jackson's intervention on her behalf, had observed the quiet respect between them. A few muttered about foreigners and propriety, but they kept their opinions quiet under Mrs. Patterson's stern eye. Christmas approached, and Valentina felt a bittersweet ache for the traditions she had celebrated in Italy, for the feast her mother used to prepare, for the carols sung in Italian on Christmas Eve. She tried to explain these traditions to Jackson and Mrs. Patterson, her English still sometimes failing when she tried to express complex emotions or descriptions. "We had fish, 7 types," she said, struggling with the words. "For the 7 sacraments, we had Toron, sweet like honey with nuts. We sang songs about baby Jesus. We went to church at midnight with candles." Mrs. Patterson listened thoughtfully. "We could make some of those traditions here. I do not know how to make Toron, but perhaps you could teach me. We could attend the midnight service. We could sing together." Jackson surprised them both by revealing he had a pleasant singing voice, learned from his mother who had loved hymns. On Christmas Eve, the 3 of them plus the remaining 2 boarders gathered in the parlor. Valentina taught them an Italian carol, helping them through the pronunciation, her heart both aching and full as she heard her native language fill the boarding house. Jackson gave Valentina a gift that evening, wrapped carefully in cloth. Inside was a beautiful Spanish shawl, intricately woven in bright colors. "I know it is not Italian," he said, "but I thought you might like it. One of the vaqueros at the ranch makes these with his wife. I commissioned it special." Valentina wrapped the shawl around her shoulders, feeling the warmth and weight of it, feeling more the warmth of Jackson's thoughtfulness. "It is beautiful," she whispered. "I love it." She had a gift for him too, something she had worked on in secret for weeks. It was a shirt she had sewn from fabric she bought with her saved wages, embroidered at the collar with a small, subtle design. "I make it for you," she said shyly. "I hope it fits." Jackson held the shirt like it was precious, running his fingers over the careful stitching. "No one has made me clothes since my mother died. This is the finest gift I have ever received." They attended midnight service together, walking through the cold December night to the small church, and Valentina felt a sense of peace she had not known since before her family died. She had Jackson's arm to hold, Mrs. Patterson beside her like a mother, a home to return to, work that gave her purpose. She had survived the journey from Italy, survived the loneliness and fear, survived being an outsider in a strange land. She was still here, still standing, and maybe even beginning to thrive. January and February of 1879 brought brutal cold and heavy snows that isolated Aurora for weeks at a time. The boarding house became a small world unto itself, the few inhabitants huddled together against the weather. Valentina and Jackson spent long evenings by the fire, talking about everything and nothing, their friendship deepening into something stronger, something that felt permanent and right. Jackson spoke of his dreams more freely now, painting pictures with words of the ranch he wanted to own someday, small but his, with good water and grass for horses and cattle. "I have been saving for 5 years," he told Valentina. "I almost have enough for a down payment on a piece of land I have been watching. It is about 10 miles from here, not much to look at now, but it has potential." "Tell me about it," Valentina urged, loving the way his face came alive when he spoke of this dream. "There is a small creek that runs through it, never fully dry even in summer. The grass is decent, would support a small herd. The previous owner built a cabin, just one room but solid. It needs work, but the bones are good. There is a barn that is half falling down, but I could fix that. I could start small, maybe 20 head of cattle, some horses to break and sell. It would be a living, not rich, but honest work on my own land." "It sounds beautiful," Valentina said, and she meant it. She could picture it clearly, could imagine the cabin and the creek, the horses grazing, a life built through hard work and determination. Jackson looked at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Would you want to see it, when the weather clears?" "Yes," Valentina said. "I would like that very much." March brought the thaw, and with it, the reopening of mines and the return of boarders to fill Mrs. Patterson's rooms. The town came alive again after the quiet winter months, and Valentina found herself busier than ever with cooking and cleaning and endless laundry. But Jackson kept his promise, and one Sunday in late March, he borrowed a wagon from the ranch and took Valentina and Mrs. Patterson to see the land he hoped to buy. The older woman came as chaperone, but also because she had genuine interest in Jackson's prospects and Valentina's future. The land was just as Jackson had described, rough and undeveloped, but with good bones. The creek rang clear and cold with snowmelt, and Valentina could see wildflowers beginning to emerge from the warming soil. The cabin was indeed just one room, weathered but solid, with a stone fireplace and good windows. The barn needed work, but it was salvageable. "What do you think?" Jackson asked Valentina nervously, and she realized her opinion mattered to him, that he was asking her to envision this not just as his dream but as their shared future. "I think it is perfect," she said honestly. "I think it could be good home, Mrs." Patterson walked the property with a critical eye, then nodded approval. "The bones are solid. With work, this could be a fine ranch. You have chosen well, Jackson." On the ride back to town, Mrs. Patterson fell asleep in the wagon bed, and Jackson and Valentina sat on the bench seat, their shoulders touching with the wagon's sway. "I am going to make an offer on the property next week," Jackson said quietly. "I have saved enough for the down payment. It will take years to pay off the note, but it would be mine. Ours." The word ours hung in the air between them, full of implication and promise. Valentina turned to look at him, seeing the hope and vulnerability in his face. "Valentina," Jackson said, pulling the wagon to a stop on the empty road. "I need to ask you something, and I need to do it properly." He climbed down from the bench and came around to her side, standing so he could look up at her. "From the wagon bed, Mrs. Patterson continued her gentle snoring, a convenient fiction that she was really asleep. "Valentina Carlyle," Jackson said formally, taking her hand in his. "I know we have only been courting for 4 months. I know by some standards that is not long enough. But I have never been more sure of anything in my life. You are brave and kind and hardworking. You make me laugh. You make me want to be a better man. You understand loneliness and loss, and you understand hope and dreams. I love you, Valentina. I love your voice, your smile, your determination, your kindness. I love how you never give up, how you work so hard to learn and grow. I love your broken words and your perfect silence. Will you marry me? Will you help me build a life on that land? Will you let me spend the rest of my life trying to make you happy?" Valentina felt tears spill down her cheeks. In her heart, she knew the answer, had known it since that first real conversation on the boarding house porch, had known it when he defended her against the drunk miner, had known it when he gave her the poetry book. "Yes," she said, her accent thick with emotion. "Yes, I will marry you, Jackson. I love you too. I love your kindness, your quiet strength. I love how you make me feel safe. I love how you see me, really see me, not just foreign girl with broken English, but me, Valentina. I love how you teach me words and listen to my stories. I love your dream and I want to build it with you." Jackson climbed up onto the wagon wheel so he could reach her, and they shared their first kiss there on the empty road with the desert stretching around them, and Mrs. Patterson pretending very convincingly to sleep in the wagon bed. When they pulled apart, both breathless, Mrs. Patterson sat up and said cheerfully, "Well, it is about time. I was wondering how long you two would dance around it. Congratulations." They were married in April of 1879 in the small church in Aurora, with Mrs. Patterson standing as witness and a handful of boarders and townspeople in attendance. Valentina wore a simple dress of cream muslin that Mrs. Patterson helped her sew, with wildflowers in her hair that Jackson had picked that morning. Jackson wore his new shirt, the one Valentina had made him for Christmas, and he looked at her like she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. The ceremony was brief, conducted by the circuit preacher who came through Aurora once a month. Valentina stumbled slightly over the English vows, but Jackson held her hand steady and spoke his own vows clearly, his voice strong with certainty. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Jackson kissed her sweetly in front of the small gathering, and Valentina felt her heart might burst with happiness. They had a simple celebration at the boarding house, Mrs. Patterson having baked a cake and prepared a nice supper. The boarders toasted their health, and someone produced a fiddle for dancing. Jackson proved surprisingly graceful, guiding Valentina through steps she did not know, both of them laughing when she turned the wrong way or he spun her too fast. As the sun set and the celebration wound down, Jackson and Valentina prepared to leave for their new home. Jackson had spent every spare moment over the past month making the cabin ready, cleaning and mending, building furniture from rough lumber, preparing it for his new wife. They would return to town often. Jackson still worked at the Morrison Ranch and would for some time while they built their own herd, but the cabin was theirs, their first real home together. Mrs. Patterson embraced Valentina with tears in her eyes. "You have become like a daughter to me," the older woman said. "I am so happy for you, for both of you. You deserve this happiness." "Thank you," Valentina said, holding tight to the woman who had given her a chance when she arrived friendless and desperate in Aurora. "Thank you for everything. You saved my life." "You saved your own life by being willing to work hard and not give up," Mrs. Patterson corrected. "But I am glad I could help. Now go, start your new life. Come visit me often. I will need help with laundry still." They rode to the cabin through the spring evening, the wagon loaded with Valentina's few possessions and wedding gifts from friends. Jackson pointed out landmarks in the growing darkness, telling her about the neighbors scattered across the vast landscape, about the best places to find water in summer, about his plans for the ranch. At the cabin, Jackson lifted Valentina down from the wagon, then surprised her by carrying her across the threshold in the traditional manner. Inside, he had lit lamps, and the single room glowed warm and welcoming. It was simple, furnished with just a bed, table, chairs, the stone fireplace, and a few shelves, but it was clean and solid and theirs. "Welcome home, Mrs. Delaney," Jackson said softly, setting her down but keeping his arms around her. "Home," Valentina repeated, tasting the English word. "I like how that sounds." That night, they consummated their marriage with tenderness and joy, learning each other's bodies with the same patience they had shown learning each other's hearts. Jackson was gentle with Valentina's inexperience, and she responded to his touch with all the passion she had kept locked away during months of proper courtship. They loved each other slowly, thoroughly, then fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, the sound of the creek audible through the open window. Valentina woke in the early morning to find Jackson already up, making coffee over the fireplace. He smiled when he saw her watching him. "Good morning, wife." "Good morning, husband," she replied, loving the way the words felt in her mouth. Their life together fell into a rhythm over the following months. Jackson worked at the Morrison Ranch 6 days a week, saving every penny he could toward paying off the land and building their herd. Valentina kept the cabin, tended a garden she planted near the creek, took in laundry and mending from town to contribute her share to their savings. She continued helping Mrs. Patterson when needed, and the older woman became a regular visitor to their cabin, enjoying Sunday suppers and offering advice on everything from cooking to ranching. In June, Jackson bought their first 5 head of cattle with his savings, 3 heifers and 2 steers. It was a small start, but Valentina saw how proud he was, how he checked on them multiple times a day, ensuring they had good grass and water. "By this time next year we will have calves," he told Valentina. "We will be a real ranch." "We are already real ranch," Valentina corrected, her English much improved but still carrying the accent Jackson said he loved. "Size does not matter. We have land, we have cattle, we have dream. That makes it real." Summer brought hard work and long days, but also joy. Valentina's garden flourished, providing vegetables they could eat fresh and preserve for winter. Jackson's skill with horses became known in the area, and neighbors began bringing him animals to break, paying him in cash or trade. Every bit of income went toward supplies, toward feed for the cattle, toward slowly improving the property. In September, Valentina realized she had missed her monthly courses. She waited another month to be certain, then told Jackson on a crisp October evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "I think I am with child," she said quietly, her hands folded over her still flat stomach. Jackson turned to her with wonder and joy and fear all mixed in his face. "Truly, you are certain?" "I am 2 months late. I am certain." He pulled her into his arms, holding her carefully as if she might break. "A baby, our baby." "Are you happy?" Valentina asked, hearing the emotion choking his voice. "Happy does not begin to cover it," Jackson said roughly. "Terrified, overwhelmed, but yes, so happy." "Thank you, Valentina. Thank you for this gift, for building this life with me, for giving me a family again." "You give me family too," Valentina reminded him. "We give each other everything." The pregnancy progressed normally through fall and into winter. Valentina continued her work as long as she could, refusing to be treated as fragile. Mrs. Patterson visited often, bringing advice and baby clothes she had saved from her own long-ago motherhood. The neighbor women, who had been friendly but distant before, warmed considerably, offering their own advice and assistance. Jackson became protective to the point of absurdity, barely letting Valentina lift anything heavier than a dish, riding home from the Morrison Ranch at lunch to check on her. She tolerated his worry with amused affection, understanding it came from love and his fear of losing someone else he cared about. "I am strong," she reminded him regularly. "Women have babies every day. I will be fine." "I know," Jackson would say, "but you are my wife, my love." I am allowed to worry. Their son was born in May of 1880, on a warm spring day with wildflowers blooming across the ranch. Mrs. Patterson attended the birth along with a neighbor woman who had delivered half a dozen babies. The labor was long and difficult, and Jackson paced outside the cabin for hours, pale and terrified every time he heard Valentina cry out. But when Mrs. Patterson finally opened the door and told him he had a healthy son, when he was allowed inside to see Valentina exhausted but smiling, holding their red-faced, wailing infant, Jackson wept openly with relief and joy. "What should we name him?" Valentina asked, stroking the baby's dark hair. They had discussed names for months, going back and forth between American names and Italian names, traditional names and unique names. "I like Joseph," Jackson said, touching his son's tiny hand with one finger. "Joseph Daniel Delaney. We can call him Joey." "Joseph," Valentina repeated, the name sounding lovely with her accent. "Yes, I like it. Joseph Daniel Delaney. Welcome to the world, little one." Parenthood transformed their lives in ways both challenging and beautiful. Joey was a colicky baby who cried more than he slept for the first 3 months, testing Valentina and Jackson's patience and endurance. But he was also perfect, with Jackson's blue eyes and Valentina's dark hair, a physical representation of their love and their union. Valentina sang to Joey in Italian, teaching him lullabies her mother had sung to her. Jackson told him stories about horses and cattle, about the land they were building together. They took turns walking him when he cried, took turns getting up for night feedings, supported each other through the exhaustion and adjustment. By Joey's first birthday in 1881, the ranch had grown to 15 head of cattle, plus 2 horses Jackson had bred and trained. They had added a second room to the cabin, a bedroom for Joey, with plans to add more rooms as they could afford it. Jackson had been promoted to foreman at the Morrison Ranch, increasing his wages significantly. Valentina's English was now fluent, her accent still present but her vocabulary and grammar nearly perfect. "Remember when I first arrived in Aurora?" Valentina said one evening as they sat on the porch watching Joey play in the dirt with wooden blocks Jackson had carved. "I could barely speak 3 words together. I was so scared, so alone." "I remember," Jackson said, taking her hand. "I remember thinking you were the bravest person I had ever met, coming to a foreign country alone, trying to build a life with nothing but determination." "I never imagined this," Valentina said, gesturing to encompass the ranch, their son, their life. "I hoped for work, for safety, for survival. I never dreamed I would find love, find home, find family." "I never imagined it either," Jackson admitted. "I thought I would work other people's ranches my whole life, grow old alone, have nothing to show for my years but calluses and a few saved dollars. Then you stepped off that stagecoach, and everything changed." They sat in comfortable silence, the kind that only comes between people who know each other deeply, who have built a life together through work and love and determination. Joey babbled to himself, knocking over his blocks and laughing at the noise. Somewhere across the ranch, cattle lowed. The creek burbled its eternal song. The sky blazed with sunset colors unique to the high desert. "Tell me something in Italian," Jackson requested, as he sometimes did. He loved hearing her native language, even though he did not understand it. Valentina spoke a few sentences in rapid Italian, her voice musical and emotional. Jackson smiled. "What did you say?" "I said that I love you more than all the stars in the sky, more than all the water in the ocean. I said that you taught me English words, but you also taught me that love needs no language. I said that you learned to love my silence and my smile before you learned to love my words, and that made all the difference." Jackson pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "I did love your silence and your smile first. But I love your words too, all of them, in English and Italian. I love everything about you, Valentina." The years passed with the steady rhythm of ranch life. A daughter, Maria, was born in 1883, named for Valentina's mother. She had Valentina's dark eyes and Jackson's easy temperament, a cheerful baby who seemed to find joy in everything. Joey doted on his little sister, already showing signs of the protective big brother he would become. The ranch grew slowly but steadily. By 1885, they ran 40 head of cattle, and Jackson's reputation as a horse trainer had spread enough that he left the Morrison Ranch to focus full-time on their own operation. The cabin had been expanded to 4 rooms, a proper house now with a parlor, kitchen, and 2 bedrooms. They had a vegetable garden, chickens, a milk cow, and plans for a new barn drawn up and waiting for the funds to build it. Mrs. Patterson remained a constant in their lives, visiting often and staying for extended periods. She had sold the boarding house in 1884, tired of the work and ready to retire. Valentina and Jackson had offered her a permanent place with them, but she preferred to keep her small house in town, saying she enjoyed her independence but loved having family nearby. "You gave me a family again, too," Mrs. Patterson told Valentina once. "When my husband died, I thought I would live out my days alone, but you and Jackson and these beautiful children, you have given me such joy." The town of Aurora began to decline in the mid-1880s as the mines played out and the silver boom ended. Many moved on to other boomtowns, but Jackson and Valentina stayed, their livelihood not dependent on mining but on ranching, which was sustainable for the long term. The town that had once had thousands of residents shrank to a few hundred permanent residents, those who had put down real roots and built real lives. In 1887, a 3rd child was born, another son they named Thomas after Jackson's grandfather. He was a quiet baby, watchful and serious even as an infant, and Valentina said he reminded her of Jackson when they first met, observing everything carefully before deciding how to respond. Life was not always easy. There were hard winters when they lost cattle to cold and hunger. There were dry summers when the creek ran low and they worried about water. There were illnesses that scared them, injuries that required trips to the doctor in town, financial worries that kept them up at night calculating how to make ends meet. But there were also countless moments of joy and beauty. Family dinners around the table with children's laughter filling the house. Christmas celebrations with traditions borrowed from both American and Italian cultures. Summer evenings on the porch with Jackson's arm around Valentina's shoulders as they watched their children play. The satisfaction of hard work paying off in a successful cattle sale or a horse sold for a good price. The deep contentment of going to bed each night beside the person you loved most in the world. In 1890, on their 11th wedding anniversary, Jackson took Valentina back to the spot on the road where he had proposed. The children were spending the day with Mrs. Patterson in town, giving the couple rare time alone. "I want to renew our vows," Jackson said, taking both her hands in his. "I want to tell you again, with more than a decade of marriage behind us, how much I love you." They stood on that empty road with the desert stretching around them, older now, weathered by sun and work and the passage of years, but their love deeper and stronger than it had been on that first proposal. "Valentina Delaney," Jackson said, his voice carrying the same emotion it had 11 years earlier. "You are my heart, my home, my partner in all things. You have given me 3 beautiful children, helped me build a ranch from nothing, made a home that is warm and full of love. You have taught me your language and your traditions. You have shown me strength and determination I admire every day. I love you more now than I did when I married you, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today." Valentina felt tears on her cheeks, the good kind. "Jackson Delaney," she said, her English now flawless though her accent remained, a permanent marker of where she had come from. "You saw me when I was lost and alone. You learned to love my silence and my smile when I could barely speak your language. You defended me, protected me, treated me with respect when others saw only foreign girl. You have given me home, family, love, everything I dreamed of but thought I would never have. You are best man I know, best father, best husband. I love you with all my heart forever." They kissed there on the road, sealing their renewed vows, then rode back to the ranch hand in hand, ready to continue building the life they had created together. The 1890s brought changes and challenges. Joey grew into a strong young man who loved ranching as much as his father did. Maria showed talent for drawing and painting, filling the house with her artwork. Thomas surprised them all by developing a passion for reading and learning, talking about maybe becoming a teacher someday. In 1895, Mrs. Patterson died peacefully in her sleep at the age of 71. Valentina mourned her like the mother she had been for 17 years, grateful for every moment, every lesson, every kindness the older woman had shown her. They buried her in the Aurora cemetery with a headstone that read, "Beloved friend and grandmother, who gave shelter to strangers and made them family." Jackson's ranch had become one of the most successful in the area, known for quality horses and healthy cattle. In 1897, he was able to purchase an additional 100 acres adjacent to their property, expanding their operation significantly. Joey, now 17, took on more responsibility, proving himself capable and hardworking. "I am proud of what we have built," Jackson told Valentina one evening in 1898 as they celebrated their 19th anniversary. "Not just the ranch, but our family, our life together. We started with nothing but hope and determination, and look at what we have created." "We created it together," Valentina said. "Everything we have, we built side by side." In 1900, as a new century dawned, Joey married a local girl named Sarah, daughter of a neighboring rancher. The wedding was held at the ranch, with friends and neighbors traveling from across the county to celebrate. Valentina watched her son pledge his life to his bride and thought about her own wedding 21 years earlier, about how far they had all come. Jackson and Valentina's first grandchild was born in 1901, a girl Joey and Sarah named Emily. Valentina held her granddaughter and felt the circle of life continuing, felt the weight of blessings she had never expected to receive. She told Emily stories in Italian, the same stories her own grandmother had told her, passing down the traditions and language even though they lived now in the Nevada desert rather than the Italian mountains. Maria married in 1903, choosing a young lawyer from Carson City who had come to Aurora on business and fallen in love with both the area and the rancher's daughter. They settled in Carson City, but visited often, and Valentina was glad her daughter had found love even if it meant she would not stay on the ranch. Thomas, true to his word, went away to Teachers College in 1904, the first member of either family to pursue higher education. Valentina and Jackson were immensely proud, even though they missed him terribly. He wrote long letters home describing his studies, his dreams of opening a school in Aurora for the children of ranching families. In 1905, Jackson and Valentina celebrated their 26th anniversary. They were in their mid-40s now, still healthy and active but feeling the accumulated years of hard ranch work in their bones. Their hair showed streaks of gray, Their faces bore the lines of laughter and worry and countless days in the sun. "Would you change anything?" Jackson asked Valentina as they sat on their porch, the same porch where they had spent countless evenings over the years. "If you could go back to that day you arrived in Aurora, would you do anything differently?" Valentina considered the question seriously. "I would tell myself not to be so afraid," she said finally. "I would tell myself that everything would work out better than I could imagine. But no, I would not change the journey. The difficulty, the fear, the struggle, it made me who I am. It made us who we are together." "I love who we are together," Jackson said, taking her hand, a gesture as natural after 26 years as breathing. "You are still the most beautiful woman I have ever seen, still the bravest person I know. And you still make my heart beat faster when you smile at me," Valentina said. "After all these years, you still make me feel treasured and loved." The years continued their march forward. More grandchildren arrived, bringing noise and laughter to the ranch. Joey and Sarah took over more of the daily operations, allowing Jackson and Valentina to step back slightly, though Jackson could never fully retire from the work he loved. Thomas opened his school in Aurora in 1908, fulfilling his dream of bringing education to rural children. Maria and her husband had 3 children and a comfortable life in Carson City. In 1910, Jackson fell ill with pneumonia during a harsh winter. For weeks, Valentina nursed him, terrified she would lose him, refusing to leave his bedside. Joey ran the ranch while his mother focused entirely on his father's care. Slowly, painfully, Jackson recovered, though the illness left him weaker than before. "I am not ready to leave you yet," Jackson told Valentina when he was finally out of danger. "We still have more time together, more sunsets to watch, more grandchildren to spoil." "Good," Valentina said, her relief making her voice shake. "Because I am not ready to let you go. I need many more years with you." Jackson regained most of his strength over the following months, and though he tired more easily than before and had to accept more help with ranch work, he remained active and engaged with life. He taught his grandsons to ride and rope, taught his granddaughters to be brave and kind, spent his evenings reading with Valentina by the fire just as they had been doing for more than 3 decades. In 1915, as they approached their 36th anniversary, Jackson organized a surprise for Valentina. He had been secretly corresponding with the Italian consulate in San Francisco, trying to trace any surviving members of her family. He had not held much hope, but he wanted to try, wanted to give her one more gift. To everyone's amazement, they found a cousin, daughter of Valentina's mother's sister, who had survived and immigrated to New York. The correspondence took months, but eventually, Valentina received a letter from this cousin she had not seen since childhood, full of family news and memories and love reaching across the distance. Valentina wept as she read the letter, wept for the connection to her past she had thought lost forever. "How did you do this?" she asked Jackson. "How did you find her?" "I wrote many letters, asked many questions, refused to give up," Jackson said simply. "You gave up everything when you came to America. I wanted to give you back a piece of what you lost." "You have already given me everything that matters," Valentina said, holding the letter to her heart. "But this is precious. Thank you, my love. Thank you for always taking care of my heart." The correspondence with her cousin became a regular joy in Valentina's life. Letters traveling back and forth several times a year, bridging the gap between New York and Nevada, between the past and the present. The cousin sent photographs of herself and her children, and Valentina sent photographs of the ranch and their large family. The letters were written in Italian, and Valentina would read them aloud to Jackson, translating as she went, sharing every detail. In 1920, as they marked 41 years of marriage, Jackson and Valentina found themselves grandparents to 14 grandchildren, with 2 more on the way. The ranch sprawled across 500 acres now, a substantial operation that employed several ranch hands and supported not just Jackson and Valentina, but Joey's growing family as well. They had lived to see the end of the Wild West era they had known in their youth. Aurora was now a quiet town of fewer than 100 residents, the mines long closed, but it remained home. The ranch had electricity now, a telephone, even an automobile that Joey drove, though Jackson preferred horses. The world was changing rapidly, but some things remained constant: love, family, hard work, commitment. On a warm evening in June of 1920, Jackson and Valentina sat on their porch as the sun set, their hands intertwined. Their children and grandchildren gathered in the yard below for a family dinner celebrating 41 years of marriage. Joey was there with Sarah and their 5 children. Maria had brought her family from Carson City. Thomas, his wife, and their 4 children completed the gathering. "Look at what we created," Valentina said softly, watching her family. "Not just children, but good people, kind people, strong people. We raised them with love," Jackson said. Everything else follows from that. As the evening deepened and the stars emerged, the family sang together, a mixture of American hymns and Italian songs Valentina had taught them. The grandchildren performed a skit they had prepared, making everyone laugh. Food was shared, stories were told. Love surrounded them like a warm blanket. Later, when the guests had departed and the house was quiet, Jackson and Valentina climbed the stairs to their bedroom, the one they had shared for 4 decades. They prepared for bed with the comfortable routine of long marriage, each knowing the other's habits and patterns. As they lay in the darkness, Jackson pulled Valentina close. "I want you to know something," he said quietly. "Every single day of these 41 years has been a gift. Every morning I wake up grateful that you said yes to that cowboy who had nothing but a dream and a piece of rough land. You made my life worth living, Valentina. You gave me everything." Valentina turned in his arms to face him, though in the darkness they could barely see each other's faces. "You gave me everything too. You saw past the broken words to the person underneath. You loved my silence and my smile before you even knew if you would love my words. You gave me home when I was lost, family when I was alone, love when I thought I would never have it. You are my heart, Jackson Delaney, and you will be until my last breath." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, as they had been doing for 41 years, as they would continue to do for all the years they had left. The ranch was quiet around them, their family sleeping peacefully, their legacy secure in the children and grandchildren who carried their love forward into the future. The story could end there, with that perfect moment of contentment and completion. But life continued its forward march, bringing both joy and sorrow as it always does. Jackson and Valentina lived to celebrate their 50th wedding anniversary in 1929, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. The celebration was held at the ranch, with people traveling from across Nevada and California to honor the couple who had built such an enduring love and legacy. They had grown old together, their faces deeply lined, their hair white, their bodies bearing the marks of 8 decades of living. But their love remained as strong as the day they married, perhaps stronger for having weathered all the storms of life together. Jackson died peacefully in his sleep in 1932, at the age of 79, with Valentina holding his hand. His last words to her were, "Thank you for the most beautiful life anyone could have asked for." Valentina lived another 8 years, surrounded by her family, tending her garden, writing letters to her cousin in New York, sharing stories with her grandchildren and great-grandchildren about the old days, about coming to America alone and afraid, about meeting a quiet cowboy who changed everything. She died in 1940 at the age of 82, and they buried her beside Jackson in the Aurora cemetery under a shared headstone that read, Jackson and Valentina Delaney, united 1879, together forever. She brought broken words. He learned to love her silence and her smile, and together they built a love that transcended language and time. The ranch remained in the family, passed down through generations, a testament to what could be built with determination, hard work, and love. The story of the immigrant girl and the cowboy became family legend, told and retold to each new generation, a reminder that love could overcome any obstacle, bridge any divide, survive any challenge. And in the end, that was their true legacy, not the land or the cattle or even the children and grandchildren, though those were all precious. Their true legacy was the proof that love could bloom in the harshest desert, that two people from completely different worlds could create something beautiful together, that broken words were no barrier to perfect understanding when two hearts beat as one. The immigrant girl who spoke only broken words when she arrived in Aurora that dusty summer day in 1878 had found everything she had lost and more than she had ever dreamed possible. The cowboy who had learned to love her silence and her smile had discovered that the greatest fortune he would ever find was not in land or gold, but in the woman who had stumbled off that stagecoach scared and alone, carrying nothing but determination and hope. Together they had written a love story that lasted 61 years and continued beyond death in the family and legacy they left behind. It was a story of the American West, of immigration and adaptation, of hard work and earned success. But most of all, it was a story of love in its purest, most enduring form, the kind of love that sees beyond surface differences to the soul beneath, that chooses commitment and partnership through every challenge, that builds rather than simply takes, that gives freely without counting the cost. Their life together was not without hardship or sorrow or struggle, but it was a life well lived, full of love and meaning and purpose. And when the final chapter closed and they were both at rest in the Nevada soil they had worked for so long, they left behind proof that love really could conquer all, that two hearts beating as one could accomplish miracles, that the most important words are often those spoken not with the tongue but with the soul. The sun rose and set over the ranch for decades after they were gone. The creek continued its eternal song. The desert bloomed each spring with wildflowers, and the family they had created continued to grow and thrive, carrying forward the lessons learned from an immigrant girl and a cowboy who found each other in the American West and built a love that time itself could not diminish.